Welcome to today's Global Connections program. I'm Bill Miller. Today we're going to focus on soft power and how important it is for not only the United States, but really every country in the world to utilize in order to be more successful. My guest today is an expert on this topic. Mark Walker, a returned U.S. Peace Corps volunteer from Guatemala, is an award-winning writer and president of Million Mile Walker. His new book is The Guatemala Reader, Extraordinary Lives and Amazing Stories. Today, we're going to be focusing on the importance of soft power versus hard power concepts. Mark Walker, welcome to today's Global Connections program.
Thank you, Bill. It's great to be back.
Great. I'll tell you, you're doing something every week. I'm just blown away here. I get your emails and that type of thing. We could do something much more often than we do. But before we forget it, what is your website before I go too far?
Right. It's www.millionmilewalker.com.
Okay, great.
And people can go on there and they can also get my newsletter as well, which is the Million Mile Walker Dispatch. That comes out monthly.
Oh, wonderful. Okay, very good. Well, let's talk about soft power and Million Mile Walker. Why did you set up this Million Mile Walker concept?
Well, I set it up about 7 years ago when I decided I was going to be a full-time writer. And basically, our focus is celebrating international travel and literature, cross-cultural relationships, overseas development, philanthropy, and social justice.
And you are certainly a leader in that area. You've been very involved in it. Before we go too far, too, I might mention that one of the, I guess, launching pads for your career and for your involvement in this issue and your basic understanding was when you were in the United States Peace Corps in Guatemala. Is that correct?
That's correct. And that was the focus of my first book, which is the memoir, Different Latitudes, My Life in the Peace Corps and Beyond. So I sat down and told my stories. I think it's important for people to understand how important these 240,000 returned Peace Corps volunteers are to our country, and especially in regards to our involvement with people overseas and international development.
Exactly. Now, the United States Peace Corps is it's a perfect example of soft power. It's not a military operation, but it is a group of Americans going overseas to provide technical assistance to, at one point, I think there were in over 90 some countries, maybe even more than that. They're now over 70 around the world to provide assistance with agriculture and education, just on across the board to help develop the infrastructure in that particular country so that that country could move forward and prosper to a large degree. On the other hand, you got the hard power, which is basically, as I see, it's some type of hardware, military hardware, whatever you want to call it, military programs to help other countries. And they both have a role to play. But the soft power is so often overlooked, is it not? Is it often not downplayed?
Well, actually, let's take a look at the origin of soft power in our country. This was back in the 1950s, and a book came out, The Ugly American by Bill Lederer. And it told about, even though it was fiction, it told the story of how the United States was losing power because our diplomats and our overseas people didn't have basic linguistic, cultural sensitivity training. And we were losing out to the other big powers. And that's why Kennedy sent a copy of this book to everyone in Congress to remind him of that and to convince them to set up a group where we have Americans going overseas where they're properly trained, they are culturally sensitive, and they're bringing back these skills to our workforce. And that's why you'll find a lot of the top people in the State Department and overseas development groups, or the groups I've been part of for 35 years, overseas development agencies. A lot of them are made up of returned Peace Corps volunteers.
And this soft power is very often, I'm just going to put a figure on it, 95 to 98% of the time never talked about. You seldom hear about it. And people in the United States don't realize, the people I've met anyway, don't realize how important it is. And I look at some of the polls that came out. I know the University of Maryland a couple of years ago did a poll on providing technical assistance in overseas development assistance. And people were asked, what percentage of our budget do you think is going to overseas help? And so often people would say 25, 30%. And in reality, what is 1%, a little less than 1%?
Less
And
than
that includes
1%
everything.
and 50% for the military. Let's be clear about that relationship as well.
Exactly. That's exactly right. Yeah. Well, you were in the Peace Corps. I was in the Peace Corps. We saw it in action, but my experience is somewhat similar to yours at times, but totally different in other respects. How did you come away with a feeling of accomplishment for your soft power involvement and helping to represent the American public and to explain to people what the American people were about, and to help explain to people in this country what people in Guatemala may be about, or some of the problems were about?
Well, I was part of an agricultural fertilizer experiment program. It was, and this reflects the multiple groups that have to partner that are involved in developing effective soft power. So I was out in a very isolated village, introducing new crops and doing experiments. But on the side, I obtained some support from the U.S. Embassy and helped this little community of Calapte, which was next to Ixijuan, and Tahamulco, the highest volcano in Central America. I helped we obtained the materials the community needed to build a new schoolhouse. And then I worked through Care International, and they obtained vegetable seeds so we could have school vegetable gardens and introduce vegetables into the diet. And CARE helped me a lot of different ways over the years. As a matter of fact, when I left the Peace Corps, my first job was a consultant with CARE International. The two directors were from the Thunderbird School of International Development here in Phoenix, and they hired me to go out throughout the highlands and to identify and research the top land management projects and techniques that we could introduce to small farmers as part of a food for work program. And that program became CARE's most important, one of their most important programs, and it was introduced throughout Central America. So there's an interaction between USAID, the embassy, and international organizations that are necessary to really pull off and to develop any type of substantial and quality program. So that was my initial experience. And over the years, as you know, I worked with a number of different groups. I was a senior director at MAP International Medical Assistance Programs. We were involved with the PEPFAR program, which is the largest overseas program focused on one disease, which is HIV/AIDS. And it has saved millions of lives over the years. And people sometimes forget what can the impact of Ebola or HIV/AIDS, or now that people are becoming a little bit more aware of TB, tuberculosis, which is the major killer of small children. And unfortunately, these programs are being cut back. Their budgets are being cut back, and we'll be discussing that later on. But that just goes to show the different types of organizations that are involved to make up quality programs that are really impactful and save the lives of people. And really, that enhances our credibility as a country, as an organization, and it just it really helps us compete with other countries around the world and develop long-term partnerships.
It certainly does. And you'll notice that the Chinese have been using soft power very effectively over the past several years. We're going to come back and talk about the slashing of the budgets, especially the AID budget. Well, you're watching Global Connections Television. which is a privately funded, independently produced program. The opinions expressed on Global Connections are solely those of the moderator and his guests. We'd invite our viewers to go to our website at www.globalconnectionstelevision.com to view previous programs. Also, if you're involved with the PBS or community access television station, or perhaps an educational institution that has an intra-campus television hookup, or you have a podcast, or you just like our shows and you want to share them, please feel free to do so. Global Connections Television is provided at no cost as a public service to help us better understand international issues and how they impact our lives. Today, we're talking with Mr. Mark Walker, who's a returned U.S. Peace Corps volunteer from Guatemala. He is the founder and president of Million Mile Walker, and we're talking about soft power. Mark, you basically, we put our toes in the water a moment ago on the soft power issue. How much damage has been done to America's credibility and to our ability to work in the future with our allies, and also to develop bulwarks against enemies, people who don't like the United States, namely the big one that comes to mind is Russia and China to some degree. But how much damage has been done through the slash and burn of the AID program and really life-saving programs that they operated?
Well, I think your terminology, slash and burn, unfortunately, is appropriate because what's happened is USAID has been dismantled on sort of a bulldozer approach, just firing people. As a matter of fact, there were several of their staff that were in going to Myanmar, into Burma, after this horrendous earthquake, and they got there right in the epicenter only to receive a message that they had been fired. Okay, and so uh, uh, as I mentioned, PEPFAR, a lot of key programs have been eliminated, and a lot of the key staff have been fired. And so what happens is we have programs where we have hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people that depend on our support for example, vaccination. So when you cut the TB, tuberculosis, and polio vaccinations, that has a very negative impact, mostly on children. Same with our programs with hunger-related activities. And people sometimes overlook the fact that today there are over 100 million people who are either refugees or displaced. 60, 70 million. Now, one of the reasons I appreciate this, my daughter, Nicole, has been with International Rescue for over 17 years. So I've got the next generation of soft power people who are out on the front line. And IRC's budget was cut dramatically. They had to let go 70 staff members. And here in Phoenix, that meant that a lot of the Afghanis who were translators and worked with the U.S. and who would have, their lives would have been on the line with the Taliban and were told that we would take care of them, they're out on the street. They don't have basic support right now. So the different ways that people's lives have been impacted without, I'm sure you heard that a lot of these letters that were sent out firing people, they said they were based on poor work ethics or quality of work, which was not the case. Most of these people are very qualified. Now, of course, there can be ways and opportunities to streamline, to improve, to update the technology, etc. But that hasn't been the approach that's been taken. And unfortunately, the DOGE group has they're made up of young techies, hackers to a degree. And so they're just mucking around with the information. Who knows where the information is going to go. Now, as a returned Peace Corps volunteer, I have to say, I think that impact is also going to lead to some unfortunate changes with the Peace Corps as well. And that remains to be seen. But we know that DOGE staff turned up at the headquarters there, and we know what happens after they get there. And of course, the leaders of the different organizations that have been set up to monitor and evaluate and avoid corruption and inadequacy, they've been fired. So even the qualified people who are on the front line, who were given the job to look for corruption, they're gone. So this is an unfortunate situation. It impacts our image, and you can bet there are two people in the world that are just tickled pink. One is Putin in Russia, and the other is Xi Jinping in China, because those are the countries that are going to fill in the void of U.S. leadership and involvement of development programs overseas.
And you're absolutely on target. Right now, so many countries are talking about, well, we can't rely on the United States anymore. There is no leadership there. We have to fend for ourselves. So they're rallying together like the European Union is doing. Many of the Asian countries are turning to China. They don't like China. They hate China for many reasons, historical reasons, but they're turning to China, saying this is the leader of the world now. And the United States basically just shot itself not in one foot, but both feet, for really no good reason. I mean, you come right down to it. If you look back 6 months ago, we had a thriving stock market. Unemployment was low. The inflation rate was okay, but it was coming down. The situation, the economic situation, was really very good. You look at it today, stock market's down to, the other day it was down to, well, one day it was down to 36,000 from a high of 46,000 of about a year ago. So we're absolutely destroying our leadership. And Russian TV, they gleefully put on this information, and they just laugh and they just talk it up, and they talk about Tulsi Gabbard being one of the best friends Russia could ever have. You know, what is she, National Security Advisor, or no, Director of National Intelligence, I guess, whatever. But anyway, they talk about this. It's like we have all of these Russian spies, and probably Chinese too, inside the DC think tank that's running this place. But it's absolutely atrocious what's going on. But going back to AID, and I use the example, if you bought a business, or if I bought one, would you walk into it and say you had 100 employees, fire everybody, slam the door, tear the lettering off of the building, and then say, now I'm going to figure out what's wrong with it and make some, make a few minor changes to make it improve? Who comes in with that rationale? The media, I'm just absolutely incredulous that they sit here and put this nonsense in the papers and what have you about what is going on. It just makes no sense whatsoever. But going also on another item that you mentioned, we talked about Ebola. And I remember when we had the Ebola scare here, and how much time and money and health resources we spent to make sure that one person who came back from Africa was sort of isolated. I think she was up in Maine. And we will have probably many outbreaks now that we have RFK Jr. heading Health and Human Services. We've dropped out of the United Nations World Health Organization. So that's a path for having Ebola, maybe another COVID outbreak in this country. This country had better batten down the hatches, because it is going to get worse. And that's just my opinion from reading the papers and listening to the news. So you may have a different approach.
No, I'm as depressed as you are about the situation, and we have to ask ourselves, including the Returned Peace Corps volunteers, what is the response going to be? And we have to be prepared to do what we're doing right now, is share the stories about the importance of soft power, and the importance to continue to promote international exchange and cross-border understanding, etc., to promote some level of empathy for the millions and millions of people that came here, trekking through the Darien's Straits, and then
Gap.
over on the beach, the train, and all the horrendous conditions, weeks and weeks. Some of them have spent five, six, $7,000. They brought their children. Most of them have relatives up here, and they're looking for one thing, which is to work. And we have the industries, the agricultural industry and the meat packing industry, etc., that urgently need the workers. And so we just need to get the word out, and we need to share the stories like we're doing here. And we have to keep focused on trying to maintain some semblance of international understanding, and really to combat this constant harassment and insults against our neighbors to the north and the south and just about everywhere else in the world right now. It's unfortunately, but unfortunate we don't appreciate, some of our leaders don't, that this is a global economy and a global world, and we need to be prepared to be part of it, and a positive part of it.
Mhm. Well, we have to be, even though we're giving our leadership away every day. And according to many of the experts, we're getting weaker by the day. Do you think, I know some of these people who are running this show, I've followed their careers for years. Do you think that some of them, or maybe most of them, really have no earthly idea what they're doing? They have no concept of the damage that could be caused through ridiculous actions or just arbitrary knee-jerk reactions to something like a tariff or whatever it might be. Have you had a chance to
Well,
look?
history will take note that this is probably the worst quality of cabinet that's ever been chosen for this country in our history. Number one, and number two, the litmus test has been across the board, identifying individuals that are willing to do whatever the president wants. Period. That is that's the only way you explain why you have people, like Kennedy and Health, and the people we have in place today.
Exactly. And it will also note that we have, according to the judicial experts, many of them, hundreds, if not thousands of them, we have the most corrupt Supreme Court and incompetent Supreme Court that we've probably ever had in the history of this country, no doubt about it. But we're down to our last minute, but you were talking about, coming across the Darien Gap between Colombia and Panama, and a very dangerous area of the world. How do you think this is playing, especially this saber rattling and this gunboat diplomacy of how we're going to take over the Panama Canal, we're going to take over Canada, Greenland, that type of thing, and in 30 seconds or less, how do you think it's going down?
Well, it's causing a lot of animosity, and really Americans are going to be shunned when we go abroad. And as a matter of fact, a lot of Canadians and Mexicans are going to the Caribbean or somewhere else when it comes for that time for them to go on vacation. So the impact is going to be horrendous. And my focus, as you know, is writing. I'm working on my fourth book, and I'm working on the life of an author who was an expat in Ecuador, Moritz Thompson. And I want to be able to share stories, literary stories, about people that have been committed to people overseas, and through their art and their literature have promoted a better understanding and a better interaction between our countries, as opposed to what we're seeing and what we see in the news every night.
Well, Mark, we were going to talk about Morris Thompson, but we got so engrossed in what's going on with this whole devastation of the United States, especially as viewed internationally. I deliberately held this for our next discussion, which I'm sure will come up soon. But Mark Walker, I want to thank you so very much for a very interesting and a very informative program.
Thank you, Bill. It's a pleasure to be with you. Take care.
Good to see. Thank you. I'm Bill Miller. Thank you for joining us today on Global Connections Television.